67 years old, and I still know the sound of every door in this house. My late wife Robyn used to say I could hear a possum sneeze in the macrocarpa hedge 3 paddocks over. She wasn't wrong about much. And she wasn't wrong about that either. Warren Tait. 67 years, 31 of them in this house on Gahir Road outside Hokitika, where the southern Alps sit on the horizon like a promise, and the rain comes in sideways off the Tasman, and everybody waves when they pass your driveway whether they know you or not. The kind of place where your neighbor brings you a bag of courgettes from his garden and doesn't knock, just leaves them on the step. The kind of place where nothing surprises you. Except tonight, my phone lit up on the bedside table at 11:52 on a Wednesday in March. I was already half awake because the wind had picked up around 10, and the corrugated iron on the old wool shed makes a particular sound in a nor'wester that I've never quite gotten used to, even after 3 decades. I looked at the screen. Callum, welcome to New Zealand Tales. Grab yourself a cuppa. Find your spot on the couch. And remember, the people in these stories were given every chance to do right by their families. They just decided not to. Leave a comment when you're done. And make sure you're subscribed. You'll want to be here for what comes next. My eldest hadn't called me after 9 at night since the evening Robyn passed. Callum Tait does not do late-night phone calls. He does Sunday afternoon check-ins, birthday cards posted a week early, and text messages that use full punctuation. At 39 years old, he is the most methodical human being I have ever raised, and I say that as a man who spent 26 years as a site manager for a civil engineering firm and never once handed in a report with a spelling error. He gets that from his mother. I answered before the second buzz. Gal. His voice came through flat and very controlled, the kind of flat that isn't calm but is doing an impression of calm for practical reasons. Dad, don't say anything yet. Just listen, and do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? I sat up. Boy, it's midnight. He said, Dad. And something in that single word put me upright like a plank. I have heard Callum use that particular tone exactly twice before. Once when he told me his mother's heart attack had been worse than the paramedics first said. Once when he told me he was going to be charged with something he hadn't done, and that I should find a good lawyer and not panic, which is exactly what you say when you want someone to panic. I'm listening, I said. Turn off your bedroom light. Don't go near the computer in the study. Leave your phone on but turn the brightness all the way down. Then go through to the back of the house, into the laundry, and lock yourself in. And Dad. He stopped. There was a pause that had weight to it. Don't let Neville know you're awake. The room went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the nor'wester. Neville Marsh. My son-in-law. My daughter. Stephanie's husband, of 11 years. The man who had been staying in the spare room at the end of my hall for the past 5 nights because, he'd told me, the firm he worked for was having the Christchurch apartment building replumbed floor by floor, and it was, as he put it, like living inside a percussion instrument. I'd said of course. I'd made the man a roast chicken. I'd lent him my good rain jacket for a walk down to the estuary. Callum, I whispered. You're frightening me. Good, he said, and his voice did something at the edge. A small fracture, quickly repaired. Be frightened. Be quiet. Go now. I didn't ask another question. I moved through that house in the dark, the way you learn to move through a place after 31 years, 16 steps, from the bed to the hallway, right hand to the wall past the framed photo of the kids at Okarito Lagoon, past Robyn's cross-stitch that still hangs beside the hot water cupboard. Home grows where love is, which I thought was a bit sentimental when she made it in 1998, and which I now consider one of the truest things I have ever read. Through to the laundry. At the back of the house. I locked the door, sat down on the edge of the chest freezer, and tried to remember how to breathe properly. I didn't know it yet, but I was sitting 12 feet away from something that had been hidden in my house for 6 years. The laundry in this house has a small high window above the tub that looks out toward the back of the property, and a louvered vent panel low on the interior wall that was supposed to be for airflow, but which Robyn always said was pointless and ugly. She'd been planning to panel over it for about 15 years. I have never been more grateful for her tendency to put things off, because through that vent, at an angle I had never thought to use in 31 years of living here, you could see a narrow slice of the hallway and the door of the back bedroom where Neville Marsh was supposedly asleep. The light under that door clicked on. I pressed my eye to the vent and held my breath. Neville was dressed. Not in pajamas, not in the dressing gown he'd borrowed from the hook behind the bathroom door. Dressed, dark trousers, collared shirt. The kind of outfit a man puts on when he has somewhere to be or something to do that requires a version of himself that looks presentable. He was holding his phone, and he was moving with a purpose that had nothing to do with a midnight glass of water. He went to the wardrobe. My spare wardrobe, where I keep old coats and a box of Robyn's things I haven't been able to sort through. He moved the box not carefully, not with any particular reverence for what it might contain, and behind it, tucked into the back corner, where the wardrobe meets the wall, was a document bag, one of those flat, rigid ones with a zipper around 3 sides, dark green. I had never seen it before in my life, and this is my house. I built that wardrobe with my own hands from Greymouth. I milled off the back of the property in 2001. I know every joint, every shelf, every inch of that space. Neville unzipped the bag and removed a folder. He sat on the edge of the bed, my spare bed, with Robyn's good quilt on it, and opened the folder on his lap. He angled his phone to use the torch, and I could see the top sheet clearly enough to read the header even from where I was crouched in the laundry with my heart going at a rate my doctor would not have approved of. Deed of Family Trust. And below that, in smaller print, Tait Family Trust. Established 14, March 2016. My hands went strange. Went distant from me. The way they do when something arrives that you're not ready to receive. Robyn and I had established the Tait Family Trust in March 2016. That part was true. Our solicitor, a good woman on Revel Street who'd handled our affairs for 20 years, had drawn it up properly, signed and witnessed, a copy lodged with her office, and a copy in my filing cabinet in the study under the tab that said, Trust Documents in Robyn's handwriting. The trust held the house, the 12 acres it sat on, and a managed fund Robyn had been quietly building since 1994 by putting away a portion of her teaching salary every single term, regardless of what else was happening. Combined, at the time of Robyn's death 3 years ago, the trust assets were valued at something just over $900,000. Not a fortune by some reckonings. By ours, it was everything. The distribution was straightforward. Equal shares to Callum and Stephanie, with the house offered to me as a life interest, meaning I could live here until I died, and then it would pass equally to them. That was what Robyn wanted. That was what we agreed. That was what I watched her sign on an afternoon when her hands were still steady and her mind was entirely her own, sitting in that solicitor's office on Revel Street with the harbor visible through the window. So why was Neville Marsh sitting on my spare bed at 12 minutes past midnight, photographing pages from a version of that document I had never seen? I watched him work through it methodically. He was not panicking. He was not rushing. He moved through those pages the way a man moves through something familiar, something he has visited before, and expects to visit again. He photographed each page separately, checked the image on his screen, moved to the next. When he reached a particular page, I could see it was dense with numbers, columns, percentages. He stopped and photographed it 3 times from slightly different angles. Then he rezipped the bag, replaced the folder, put the box of Robyn's things back in front of it. He took less than 2 minutes, putting everything back. That's how practiced it was. He went back to bed, turned the light off. I sat on the freezer in the dark for a long time. Callum had said, don't let Neville know you're awake. Not be careful. Not there might be a problem. Don't let Neville know. The way you say it when you already know exactly what's happening and you need one specific thing not to occur. I sat there, and I did the arithmetic I did not want to do. Callum had been charged with tax fraud 4 years ago. The case had appeared from nowhere, moved with a speed that his own solicitor described as unusual, and resulted in a conviction that Callum had always maintained was built from evidence he had never seen before it was presented against him. He'd served 14 months at Rolleston. He'd come out quieter. He'd spent 2 years re-establishing himself, working in compliance consulting, sitting exams, rebuilding. And then, 8 months ago, he'd quietly joined the Financial Markets Authority as an investigator. I'd thought it was Callum turning his experience into purpose, the way he'd always turned hard things into forward motion. His mother's son entirely. But sitting in my laundry at midnight, I started to think that maybe Callum hadn't taken that job out of purpose. Maybe he'd taken it out of precision. I didn't know yet that my son had spent 4 years documenting the man sleeping 12 feet from where I sat. I didn't know how many of those 14 months in Rolleston he'd spent planning what came after. I didn't know any of it yet. What I knew was this. My son-in-law had a hidden document bag in my wardrobe. It contained what looked like an altered version of my family trust, and my son, who worked for the financial regulator, had called me at midnight to make sure I was out of sight before something happened. The house was very quiet. Outside, the nor'wester had dropped. The wool shed was silent. I thought about Robyn's box in the back of that wardrobe, about Neville's hands, moving it aside without looking at what it was. I thought, there are certain things a man is not meant to have to feel at 67 years old. And then I thought, whatever is coming, I want to be standing up when it arrives. My phone vibrated. One short pulse. A message from Callum. Still in the laundry? I typed back. Not planning on leaving anytime soon. A pause. Then, come to the side gate. Leave your shoes off. I'm parked on Gahere Road, the silver Hilux 3 houses down. I went through the house in my socks, out the side door, across the wet grass of my own property like a man who had somehow become a visitor to his own life. The March night was warm and still now, that particular West Coast stillness that comes after the wind drops and everything smells like bush and rain and salt and something that has no name but means home. Callum's Hilux was where he said it would be, lights off, engine cold. He'd driven from Christchurch, 4 hours through the passes in the dark. I got in the passenger side. He looked terrible. Pale in the way that people go pale when they've been running on adrenaline and bad coffee for too long, with shadows under his eyes that told me 3 days of poor sleep at a minimum. He was 39, but he looked older than that tonight. He looked more than he ever usually did. Like his mother. I looked at him for a moment. I made that man a roast chicken, Cal. He blinked. Sorry? NewZealand. I made him a whole roast chicken. Lemon and rosemary. The good free-range ones. From the butcher on Weld Street. Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. The impression one leaves when it passes. I know, Dad. I know you did. You could have warned me. He shook his head slowly. Not until we had what we needed from the physical document. Everything before tonight was traceable inference. If I'd told you, you'd have reacted, even slightly, and he would have moved the bag. He needed to believe he was invisible. I turned in my seat to look at him properly. Talk. All of it. He talked for 38 minutes. I didn't interrupt once, which, if you know anything about me, is as close to a miracle as the West Coast is likely to witness without divine intervention. Here is what he told me. The Tait Family Trust, as it was actually established in March 2016, specified equal distribution between Callum and Stephanie. This was not the version that had been registered with the company's office following Robyn's death 3 years ago. The version that had been registered gave Stephanie's share an additional component, a management override clause that effectively meant Neville As Stephanie's husband and the self-described manager of her financial affairs, controlled all distributions, all investment decisions, and all dealings with the property. In perpetuity, Callum's share had been reduced to a minority interest, with no practical power. The alteration had been made to a page deep in the document, in language dense enough that a layperson reading quickly would not notice the difference from the original. The change had been facilitated by a conveyancing clerk at a law firm in Greymouth who had been paid, Callum believed, in the vicinity of $15,000 to swap a single page before the document was filed. The original page was what Neville kept in the bag. Insurance, Callum said quietly. Same as always. He keeps the proof of what he did as a leash on the process. If anyone ever challenged the registered version, he could destroy the original. If anyone got too close, he could claim the original had been misplaced. He needed to be the only person who knew where it was. I sat with that for a moment. How long have you known? Known enough to move? 8 months. That's why I took the FMA role. I needed the investigative access, and I needed the legal standing to act on what I'd found. Before that, I had reconstruction and inference. Solid inference, but not enough. And the fraud charge that put you in Rolleston? Callum exhaled through his nose. Long and steady, fabricated. Neville had a contact at an accounting firm in Christchurch. They created a paper trail, false invoices, a shell entity, payments that looked like they'd been routed through a company connected to my consultancy, filed a tip with the IRD. It moved to the Serious Fraud Office in 2 months. He paused. I want you to understand how constructed it was, Dad. This wasn't something he improvised. He was planning this before he proposed to Steph. That sentence landed the way a particular kind of news lands, not with noise, but with a kind of settling, everything rearranging itself around a new and heavier fact. Before he proposed, I repeated. He was mapping the asset structure before he ever asked her to marry him. He knew about the trust. He knew about Mum's managed fund. He knew what the estate would be worth. He just needed to remove the complicating factor. Me, I said. You. With you gone and me neutralized, Steph's share, his share, was the dominant interest. All he needed was the management clause in the trust document and the right paperwork. I looked out through the windscreen at my house. My oak tree at the gate. The one Robyn planted the year we moved in, because she said every proper house needed a tree that would outlive the people in it. The lights off inside. Neville Marsh asleep in my spare room under my dead wife's good quilt. Why not tell me, Cal? After Rolleston, after you'd started building the case, why did I have to find out in the laundry at midnight? He turned to look at me then, properly. The first time since I'd got in the car, because you would have gone to Stephanie. The silence that followed had its own shape, and Stephanie would have gone to Neville. More silence, and Neville would have run, or destroyed the document, or both. And I'd have spent 4 years on something that evaporated before I could get my hands on it. I needed him comfortable. I needed him moving around this house believing he'd won. I needed him to come back to that bag one more time on the record. You used my house, I said. I used his habit, Callum said. His habit of checking on things he thinks only he knows about. Your house was just where his habit lived. I tried to be angry at him. Examined the anger from different angles. It didn't fit right, because underneath the 4 hours in the laundry and the roast chicken and the borrowed rain jacket and the 14 months I'd spent driving 4 hours each way to visit my son in Rolleston, underneath all of it was something that I was not entirely prepared to admit. My boy had done this absolutely correctly. He'd had every reason to lose his head. To make phone calls, to confront, to let bitterness drive him somewhere that couldn't be undone. Instead, he had come out of prison quieter, and he had spent 4 years building something watertight and irrefutable and completely legal. He had done it right. What happens now? I asked. Callum reached into the back seat and produced a folder. Inside it, he showed me photographs of the original trust document page, the real one. The one Robyn had signed alongside the version that had been filed. Side by side. The difference was visible once you knew what you were looking at. A single substituted clause, buried in subsection 4 of Schedule 2, that changed the distribution structure entirely. Alongside the documents was a financial summary, 3 years of trust distributions since Robyn's death, all of them processed through an investment advisory firm in Auckland that Neville had a non-disclosed interest in. A river of quiet money, moving in a direction nobody was supposed to notice. And there was one more item. A screenshot of a text message exchange between Neville and the conveyancing clerk, recovered from a phone that the clerk had since disposed of, but which, it turned out, had been backed up to a cloud account the clerk had forgotten about. It was enough. Callum said so plainly. Enough for charges. Enough for the trust to be unwound and re-registered correctly. Enough for everything Robyn intended to go where Robyn intended it to go. There's a mediation conference, he said. Day after tomorrow, Friday morning. In Greymouth. The FMA has notified Neville's legal representative that he's required to attend. He doesn't know yet how much we have. He thinks it's a preliminary inquiry. He's expecting to talk his way through it. He almost smiled when he said the last part. He won't, I said. No, Callum said. He won't. I sat for another moment with the folder on my lap and the nor'wester gone and the west coast dark and quiet around us. She knew, didn't she? I said. Your mother. She never said it outright, but she knew something wasn't right about him. Callum was quiet for a long time. She told me once, he said finally. About 8 months before she died, she said there was something in Neville's eyes when money came up. Something that went very still and very attentive. She said it reminded her of a dog watching a gate. I thought about that. About Robyn and her gift for seeing through surfaces to what was actually operating underneath. About how she would have hated being right about this particular thing. Go get some sleep, Callum said. Friday's going to be a long day. I got out of the car and stood on Gaher Road in my socks in the dark. I looked back through the window. Call. He looked up. Your mother would have been so proud of how you did this. He held my gaze. Then he reached forward and put the Hilux in drive. Get some sleep, Dad. He pulled away, and I stood there until his taillights were gone around the bend. And then I walked back across the wet grass to my own front door, past the oak tree, past the side gate, into the house that Robyn had filled with 31 years of Tuesday dinners and school holiday projects and cross-stitch, and the particular smell of someone who loves a place and tends to it properly. Neville Marsh was asleep 12 feet away. He'd made himself at home in my house. He'd moved my dead wife's things aside without a second glance. He'd sent my son to prison for 14 months and shaved years off what should have been a straightforward life. He'd sat at my kitchen table and eaten my food and looked me in the eye with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never once considered that he might have miscalculated. I went to bed. I did not sleep. Friday in Hokitika starts the way it always does. The tui going at it in the cowhide by the front fence. The neighbors' cows making their opinions known down toward the creek flats. The light coming in off the Tasman in that particular way it does in late summer when the sky is high and clean and the mountains look close enough to touch. I made breakfast at 6:30. Eggs, toast, good strong tea. My mother's rule. Never do anything that matters on an empty stomach, and never do it hungry. Because hungry people make poor decisions, and the world already has plenty of those. Neville came through from the spare room at 7:15 in his dressing gown, looking rested. He asked if there was tea left. I poured him a cup and smiled and told him it was a good morning for it. He agreed. He sat at my kitchen table, Robyn's kitchen table. The one we drove to Nelson to collect in 1997 because she'd seen it in a second-hand shop and said it was exactly right, and it was. And he scrolled through something on his phone. with the easy posture of a man who believes the day ahead contains nothing more demanding than a preliminary conversation with a regulator he has already planned around. "Big day?" I said conversationally. He glanced up. "Meeting in Greymouth this morning. Bit of a drive." "Shouldn't be long." I said I hoped it went smoothly. He said he expected it would. I turned back to the bench and looked out at the oak tree and thought, "Enjoy your tea, Neville. Last cup you'll drink as a man with no accounting to do." The mediation conference was held in a room on the second floor of a building on Moherra Quay in Greymouth, which is the sort of room that has been designed to feel neutral and has therefore achieved a quality of stressful blankness. Pale walls, a long table, a window overlooking the Grey River. Doing what the Grey River does, which is move steadily toward the sea without editorial comment. I had not been invited. Callum had been specific about that. This was a regulatory proceeding, not a family confrontation, and my presence would complicate the procedural record. What I had been asked to do was wait. I drove to Greymouth that morning anyway, parked on Tait Street, and sat with a flat white from the cafe on the corner, watching the river. At 10:20, Callum texted me. "He's here. He's got his solicitor. He still thinks this is manageable." At 23 past, "Give us 2 hours." At 12:41, "Come up. Side entrance, second floor. Ask for Aroha at the front desk." I finished the coffee that had gone cold 40 minutes earlier, walked across to the building, and went up. Aroha turned out to be a composed young woman who looked at me with the expression of someone who has been briefed and is choosing kindness. She showed me to a small anteroom with a glass panel that looked into the main conference room. Neville was still seated at the table. His solicitor was beside him with a hand on his forearm. Callum was at the other end, along with a woman in a gray blazer. I didn't know she was from the FMA's legal division. I'd learn later, and a second man, with a document case. The room had the specific quality of air that exists after something very significant has just occurred. Neville's face was the thing I would come back to. He had a particular expression that he'd always defaulted to in situations that required managing a kind of controlled readiness, the look of a man who has prepared multiple versions of what to say and is selecting the right one. I'd seen it at Christmas dinners when the conversation got complicated. I'd seen it at Robyn's funeral, that carefully calibrated look of a grieving son-in-law who knows where all the cameras are. I'd come to think of it as his operating face. The one underneath was one I'd never been permitted to see. I was seeing it now. It was not dramatic. It was not what you'd describe as a collapse. It was more like a specific kind of subtraction, like watching a man's certainty vacate his features all at once. Quietly, without announcement, the way a tide goes out and leaves everything underneath suddenly and starkly visible. Callum was speaking. I couldn't hear the words through the glass, but I knew from the document he was holding the 2-page comparison, original against filed version, what was being said. Neville's solicitor was leaning forward. Neville himself had stopped looking at the documents and was looking instead at the table surface in front of him, and I recognized something in that posture. The posture of a man recalibrating, searching for the angle. Finding that the room has been built without angles, there was a moment, 30 seconds, perhaps 40, where the recalibration was visible, where you could see him considering whether there was a version of this he could talk his way around, whether the right combination of words existed, whether he had an exit. He didn't. I knew he didn't because Callum had spent 4 years making sure there wasn't one. The solicitor said something. Neville nodded once, slowly. He sat back, and the particular quality of readiness left his face entirely, and what remained was just a man, unremarkable and diminished, sitting in a room in Greymouth on a Friday in March, with the Grey River moving past the window, and 4 years of careful work arranged in documents on the table in front of him. I stepped back from the glass. Aroha brought me a cup of tea I hadn't asked for, which is the sort of thing people do in New Zealand when they understand that something hard is happening and don't want to make a speech about it. I said thank you and meant it fully. Callum came out 20 minutes later. He looked exhausted in the way people look when they've been holding something up for a very long time and have just been permitted to set it down. He sat down beside me, and for a moment neither of us said anything. What happens to him? I asked. Referral to the Serious Fraud Office, Callum said. The clerk in Greymouth has already been interviewed. She cooperated. The trust gets unwound. The registered version set aside. The original reinstated. The distributions from the last 3 years get reviewed. He paused. The investment advisory arrangement gets examined separately. He looked at his hands. He won't be practicing in financial services again. Full stop. And Stephanie? A longer pause. She didn't know, he said. I'm certain of that. She'd been told by Neville that the trust restructure was something Mum had agreed to late in the process, a late revision for tax efficiency. She'd had no reason to question it. He'd managed everything. She'd trusted him with all of it, because that's what he'd told her to do from the beginning. I thought about my daughter, about the fact that she was going to receive a phone call today that would rearrange everything she thought she knew about 11 years of her life, about the fact that her brother, who she believed had been a fraudster, had in fact been the most loyal person in her orbit for the entire duration of her marriage. That part was going to be its own long process. She'll need you, Callum said quietly. I know, I said. And she'll need to know that what Mum wanted was always what Mum wanted. That nobody changed it permanently. He reached into the document folder and placed something on the table between us. A certified copy, freshly sealed, the reinstated trust document, bearing Robyn's actual signature, her actual intentions, the version that reflected a woman who had thought carefully about what she was leaving behind, and for whom. I put my hand flat on it. We drove back to Hokitika separately. By the time I turned into Ngaheri Road, Neville's hire car was gone from the driveway. The spare room door was open, and the house had the particular quality of a space that has been quietly vacated. I went to the spare room. The wardrobe was closed. I opened it, moved the box of Robyn's things aside, and looked at the back corner. The document bag was gone. I replaced the box carefully. Properly, this time. The way it deserved to be handled. That evening I sat on the back step with a cup of tea and watched the light go off the Alps, the way it does in late summer when the sky is very clear, all that gold and rose on the snow, and then the blue coming in and the first stars appearing above the main divide in the order they've always appeared in. The order they'll keep to long after Ngahera Road is someone else's history. Stephanie called at 7:30. She cried for a while and I let her. And then she stopped and asked me what Robyn had actually wanted. And I told her. And she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, I always knew something wasn't adding up. I just didn't know what question to ask. That's the thing about people like Neville Marsh, I told her. They spend a great deal of energy making sure you never know what question to ask. She asked if she could come up on the weekend. I said I'd make a roast. A proper one this time, I said. She laughed briefly, and it sounded like her mother. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning with the tui back in the cowhigh and a south wind, bringing the smell of the sea up from the estuary, I came downstairs and made tea and stood at the kitchen window looking at the oak tree. 32 years old now. That tree. Robyn had said, plant something that will outlive you. And we had. And it had. On the kitchen table was a green folder, Tait Family Trust Original, in Robyn's handwriting on the tab. Because even in the middle of chemotherapy in 2016, she had always labeled things so that other people could find them later. Inside was the reinstated document, certified and sealed and filed correctly. Finally, in the place it should always have been. I put my hand on the folder. Got him, love, I said to the kitchen, to the cross-stitch on the wall, to the woman who once told me she could hear a possum sneeze in the macrocarpa hedge and was correct about that and most other things. It took longer than it should have, but we got him. Outside, the tui made its particular sound. The one that seems like showing off, but is in fact just the honest expression of a creature that knows what it's for. I poured my tea. It tasted for the first time in 4 years exactly right. Some things are worth remembering when a story like this one settles into the quiet at the end. Trust, whether it is given to a person or embedded in a legal document, is only as strong as the integrity of the people who hold it. A signature on a page is not protection by itself. The protection is the character of the people in the room. Robyn understood that. She chose carefully in most things. She chose badly in one, and she may have suspected it before any of the rest of us were willing to see it. If you are ever asked to hand the management of your affairs entirely to another person, no matter how capable they present themselves, keep one eye open. Ask the questions that feel awkward. Read the documents before you sign them. Have someone you trust read them too. Someone with no stake in the outcome. Greed, dressed in a good suit, and a reasonable explanation is still greed. It simply takes longer to recognize. And if you have a child who has been wrongly accused of something who has come out of an experience quieter and more deliberate than they went in, do not make the mistake of thinking the quiet means defeat. Sometimes the quiet is patience. Sometimes the quiet is a man in a silver Hilux, driving 4 hours through the night on a road he's memorized, carrying 4 years of work in a folder on the back seat, waiting for exactly the right moment. Callum Tait waited for exactly the right moment, and the rest of us got to see what that looks like when it arrives.